Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. How's everybody doing? Emily, how are you? Welcome back.
Thank you so much. I am doing well. It's a beautiful day here in New York City, so it's a pleasure to be on with you. You can kind of see Broadway out the back of my window, so hopefully everybody feels like they're here with me. How are you? How are you,
I'm
Melissa?
good. I'm good. I'm so excited to have you back, Melissa. Hi, happy Friday. How are you?
Hello, I am doing wonderful. We're heading on to the end of the year. I'm ready for 2023.
Yes, everybody watching, it is Beyond the Steps Day. That means that we tackle one question under any one number of topics from racism, gender and equity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and dance medicine and science, and more. And how are those topics affecting performance athletes? Every week we have one guest expert join us to answer your questions and get deeper into that topic. Today we're talking with Emily Bufford about the pros and cons of tackling a a professional career right out of high school versus going the collegiate path. And I know that this is a time of year when our graduating seniors are really contemplating what their next steps are if they're not already, right? And there's a lot to consider here in terms of cost and reasoning and where you want to go with your career, what your personal goals are. So there's a lot to consider. Emily has a lot of insight and experience to offer as a dance educator. So we're excited to talk to her and pick her brain throughout this conversation. Please do put your questions and comments in the chat. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and our friends on Instagram. Welcome. We want to hear from you. Share this conversation, like and subscribe wherever you're at. And we look forward to hearing from you throughout the next hour. So, Melissa, tell us a little bit about Emily so everybody knows who we have today.
We are so excited to have Emily back with us. She hasn't been with us since April of 2021. So we are super excited to have her. Emily is on faculty at New York City's Broadway Dance Center and Steps on Broadway. Emily Buffer continues to impact the New York dance scene. Examiner.com says, yes, we have a superstar with us. Emily is the producer of the Young Choreographers Festival in New York City, presenting hashtag Future of Dance and sought after educator in the US and abroad. You can learn more about Emily at emilybufford.com. Emily, thank you so much for being here. You are so accomplished and brilliant and just wonderful and working all the time. I follow you on Facebook and Instagram, and we are just so happy that you took some time out for us today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here as always. The same can be said right back for the both of you that you are wonderful and so accomplished. And it really is a privilege to get to sit here with two wonderful women who are of the same mindset. So thank you for that. And I just thought, hi, Leslie on Instagram. Leslie Scott is on. So nice to see you.
Hey,
Uh, le-
Leslie.
yeah, and for those that don't know, Leslie Scott has founded Neama.org, NEAMA. They are doing incredible work to keep kids happy, healthy, safe in dance and protected. There's so much education and research on the panel of that organization, and we look forward to telling you more about them in 2023, where we're examining some great ways to partner with Niyama to continue to keep children safe and performance athletes safe and protected because they deserve that in pursuing what they love to do. So, Leslie, congrats to you on all that work. And for anybody that's looking to learn more, go to Neama, NEAMA.org. Um, but I want to get started, and there's a lot on this conversation, Emily, because I feel like if you would have asked me 5 years ago what my perspective, or 10 years ago what my perspective was on this, I would have said college all the way. I mean, being super transparent and straightforward, I would have said college all the way. I got my business degree and pursued my professional dance career after starting at the age of 24, right? But now with the price of the cost, the price tag that comes with a college education, the dance is a lot more commercialized. There's a lot more ways for you to be involved in the dance industry without necessarily being on stage. I don't, it's not so black and white, cut and dry, I don't think. So we're really looking forward to diving into this with you. Um, when it's time to transition from studio life to the next chapter of a dance journey, right? Many performance artists or athletes of any kind feel torn between immediately going that professional route, right? Where the payoffs can be almost immediate and or sometimes, right, immediate, and you see the progress right away, versus going to college. And when we had you on the last time, I think Melissa said 2018, which is a while ago, one of the big factors,
2021.
21, sorry, I'm sorry. One of the big factors that you asked viewers to consider during that time, it doesn't even really have to do with performance at all. It more had to do with emotional maturity. So can you talk about that a little bit and your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I do still stand firm, actually, that the choice for young dancers has a lot to do with emotional maturity and figuring out, what feels like it will be the best fit for their dance journey and what they hope to pursue and what their dreams kind of include. I think a big part of it, as much as I don't love the idea of networking for many young dancers, is what relationships do they already have built? With permission from one of my own assistants and one of my kids, she went to a dance program for her freshman year and then actually realized after her freshman year that it wasn't for her and is now pursuing her training in a different way and actively training here in New York City, where she's now working, which is much in the same way my dance career kind of unfolded itself, is that I did move to New York City to go to school, not to go for a dance degree. My mother was kind of like, if you're going to New York to dance, then study something different in New York City and then do your training at the studios where you have relationships built with these educators and pursue it that way. And, in many ways, that was a fortunate perspective to have because my mother it was and still is so supportive, but I had the maturity to know that what I wanted to pursue didn't require going to a dance program, that I didn't ever, for me, I never loved performance itself. I don't love going on stage. I love the element of putting others on stage and watching that unfold itself. And so for me as a dancer in my own personal journey, I was mature enough to know if I go to pursue a BFA, these programs at that point were pretty much all entirely dedicated to performance. And so if you don't want to perform, then should you be going for a BFA where the focus is performance? And knowing that about yourself and really having the wherewithal to sit down with somebody and say, I don't think that this element of dance is the element that I hope to pursue long term, is going to a school and spending that much money on an education, even in the field that I hope to work in, is it going to direct me to the career path that I hope to have? And I think for many young dancers, a lot of that also unfolds with, do they have relationships with higher education educators? Coming from a dance studio is a wonderful thing. I grew up at the studio I grew up at from the time I was 2.5 until I graduated at 18. And, it shifted my perspective when I was training with the teachers in New York City, because their offering was different than what the offering of my educators at my home studio were. Not for any fault of anybody, just this is what you see every day, and this is kind of where you get your perspective from. And I do think, a dancer who's more local, let's say, to New York City, I'm going to use this example, or more local to Los Angeles, or more local to Dallas, let's say, or to some other hubs where there are larger companies doing work, they often have relationships already built with people who can guide them to whether a college program will be a good fit, or if they should just train the way they want to train and pursue something different, or not go to college at all. I personally am an advocate of go to school, but if performance is maybe not your goal, study something different, study business, study journalism, study go be a pre-med, like go be a doctor and then work
I
with
agree with you
dancers.
on that.
There's so
Yeah.
many fields.
Yeah. And when we talk about emotional maturity, that's a whole different bucket because you really like I know I had students that they had never been out on their own. They didn't even know how to like do basic
Do
things in
anything,
life
right?
where you throw them in New York City or LA or Hollywood and they're going to get eaten alive. And the
Mm-hmm.
whole goal, right, is longevity in your career for as long as you want it, but you're in charge of when that end game happens for your career, not something else. So not something out of your control. And when you go to a big city like that where the rent is extremely high, it's a more of a high pressure. You go from big fish in a small pond to being a small fish in a very very big pond. That pressure and what you have to do day to day it changes immensely. So I think a young adult has to be ready for that, and everything that comes with paying bills and making sure that you have enough money to cover the basic necessities in addition to training, which I
Absolutely.
think is a big consideration. And if a kid should head towards college, or whether that be community college, university, whatever, versus going professional.
100%. And I also think, one of the elements of emotional maturity that they have to think about is, are they equipped to be responsible enough to themselves to go take ballet class 3 or 4 times a week? Are they equipped to get themselves into
Mm-hmm.
modern class 3 or 4 times a week? Are they going to take what would be their elective, i.e., probably their tap or their street styles class a couple times a week? And are they going to be dedicated in actually going? Because if they're not and they know that about themselves, then they do need to be in a structured program. If dance is what they want to pursue, then they do need to find themselves in a place where somebody says, you have to show up for 8 a.m. ballet. It's 5 days a week. If you don't show up, your grade is affected by it. You do have to show up for your jazz class 3 days a week. If you don't show up, your grade is affected by it. Because then there's a motivating factor for showing up. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
a lot of young dancers I find that the ones who tend to be really, really hungry are self motivated enough that you don't have to
100%.
have that incentive of a grade there. But again,
And I
that does come
remember it's
with
funny. Yeah, it's funny because Leslie's on. When I moved to LA, I was like, I'm just going to take class like it's my job. Like, I'm going to take as many classes as I can. And, I took Leslie's class like 3 days a week. Anytime I could find Leslie, I would go find, because she really broke it down. But you really, as a dancer, have to find you're really stripping yourself bare and building yourself back up, because the way I danced when I moved out to LA totally changed from the way I
Mm-hmm.
danced in my home studio. I mean, you have to go next level, and you need to be taking class. There's very few teachers in those environments that are going to take the time to educate you, the way that
Mm-hmm.
you need in that moment, to really help you get the understanding that you need to go back to the basics and build it back up in a smart way that it's going to last. And
Yeah.
those are the teachers you need to find, and they are few and far between. But it is not a simple process. You don't just go take class. For most people, it's a long time of figuring out who you are as a dancer, finding an agent, but audition after audition, booking gigs. It takes a long time and a lot of stamina.
it
Mm-hmm.
takes a long time. Absolutely, everything you just said, and it also takes a willingness on the part of the young dancer to. I joke, in class sometimes I'll say, okay, here's a big spoonful of humble pie, pick your flavor. But it takes, a giant dose of humility also to be willing, coming out of a competition studio. I'll share my own experience. I moved to New York. I had a relationship with one of my dear mentors, a woman by the name of Ginger Cox, who now is on faculty at several universities, actually, in the tri state area. And she was like, we need to rip your competition habits right out of you. It's no longer about this, and this. It's more about this, and this. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
hard transition for a young dancer to be like, oh, wow. So these things that I thought were very viable for the last, I started competing when I was 8 years old and I stopped competing when I was 18 years old. So for the last decade of your life, these qualities have been viable and they have kept you successful. And now we're going to go, okay, those qualities are actually no longer the viable
Mm-hmm.
elements of your dancing. And those things that you work so hard to have, nobody really cares about them.
Totally.
Like,
Like, I
Yeah.
remember being like the compact, like energetic, fiery dancer that like was
Mm-hmm.
so performance. And then like I you get out to LA and they're like, all of it? No. Just
yeah,
no.
like calm down.
Like calm
Let
it
it go.
down, like find the
Mm-hmm.
pocket. Like it's okay to not hit every other, like be musical with it. And I was like, I felt so confident in that. And without that, who am I? Who even am
Mm-hmm.
I as a dancer, right?
And it's
So that
hard because
yeah,
you feel like, I feel like that age range that does compete is such an informative time of a young dancer's life. So to then have to move forward from that to another informative time, but now you're old enough for, not only is it informative, but it's self-reflective of like,
yeah,
oh, these qualities that were built during this very important time of my life now are not qualities that maybe I want to keep, and having to be ready to evolve into your next self, which can be very, I mean, it can be challenging, it can be
yeah.
painful, because your sense of self-worth often with these young dancers, with myself included, I mean, I'm 34 now. I remember that period of life, not like it was yesterday, but it wasn't that long ago. And I think, oh, wow, it was really hard to have somebody say to me, all these things that you've worked all this time on having are now things that we're going to go, okay, bye. Like, please, thank you so much. You served me when you served me. And now they don't really serve you. And you have to step into this new version of yourself at a higher level and a more informed state and place of being. And it's hard. It's emotionally challenging for a young dancer to have that experience. But I do think it's an experience that is beneficial, because then you're able to step into your artistry better. You step into, metaphorically 18 for college, but you're stepping into adulthood, you're stepping into new experiences, and you're stepping into a larger pool. You stop being a large fish in a small pond, and you start being a very small fish in a huge ocean that has so much there that you can find and that can be offered to you and that you can offer it. The goal, I think, often with these young artists is like finding someone who can offer them something. And I think we need to work on reversing that, and going as young artists, or even myself at this point in my life, I look at it and I go, well, what can contribute? What can I
Mm-hmm.
contribute to that larger ocean? How do I become an asset to the pool that I now find myself in? And I think young artists oftentimes don't have that perspective. And I think that also is self-awareness and maturity, emotional maturity of, I'm not just here for what I can get, but if I'm also here for what I can give, even if what I can give needs evolution, there's always room for somebody who's generous
Yeah.
if they're also open to evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great segue. So let's talk about the pivot, right? Through our journey with Apollo, we always talk about how important it is to pivot multiple times and be ready to do that, be flexible and
Right.
nimble, right? And it's something that we always tell our students is you don't have to figure it out right now. You can always change your mind and pivot, right? So is it possible to start a career and pivot to a higher education program, or vice versa? um, or do you think being resolute in your goals is the better path?
In my experience working with younger dancers and a lot of auditioning age dancers, I find it a very fortunate position, quite candidly, that I work with a lot of young dancers at the point where they're auditioning either for high school programs or they're auditioning for their college programs, or making that really, that very important life decision of should they be going to college and pursuing dance, or should they be going to high school and pursuing dance there, or do they want to pursue something different and pursue dance in a different manner, or do they not want to pursue dance at all? And I think that's also important for young dancers to know that, like, just because you grew up competing and you love dance and you were good at it doesn't mean you have to pursue it. There's always a pathway that you can find joy in if dance is not the one for you. But I do think, you can decide that you want to take a moment for yourself or go directly to school, or do whatever feels best in your spirit, and know that there is the ability to do that metaphorical pivot and change course and change your mind or change location. You know, you might start in one dance program and decide it's not the right fit for you and audition for a different program. With that said, just to, you know, provide the caveat to that, is not all dance programs will take transfer students. And so that is the one kind of downfall to the ability to pivot. If you decide that the school that you really dream of going to says, oh, well, we don't take, you know, sophomore transfers, that might be
Yeah.
a small downfall to it. But at the end of the day, then maybe it wasn't meant for you anyway. If the school feels so strongly that, you know, they're only training dancers in their BFA program or their BA program that they had as freshmen, because that is maybe a red flag for a dancer who does maybe want the ability or feel like they need the ability to take a pivot at some point. I think, you
Yeah.
know, one of the things you want to make sure you don't do for yourself as a young dancer is pigeonhole, whether that be into, you know, metaphorically into a style or genre, but also into a program where, oh, I'm so stuck on this program only because like it's the hype program right now, and not do your due diligence about what being a part of that program actually means. You know,
Mm-hmm.
who are the teachers there? What have they done? Is the information you're going to be receiving relevant to what you hope to pursue? If you want to be on Broadway, then you need to look for programs where a lot of their alumni are working successfully on Broadway. If you want to do commercial dance, you need to look at programs where a lot of their alumni are working successfully in commercial dance, and not going, well, I just want to go to this school because it sounds cool, you know, which I think at this
Mm-hmm.
point, fortunately and unfortunately, I think some of the dance programs have really built upon this notion of like they're hyped up. There's great dancers going in, there's great dancers coming out, but at the end of the day, just because a program is great doesn't mean it's a great program for you. And so that ability to pivot really has to be something that I think should be considered before you even step foot in an audition room for a program. Is this a school that if it's not the right fit for me, will I be able to segue to a different program there? Will I be able to segue
Mm-hmm.
to a different program somewhere else? Would I be able to leave and come back? You know, would I be able to take a leave of absence for a semester and kind of metaphorically find my life and decide what I want to do? And would you still be welcome back if that is the case? Do they allow you to work? Some of the programs here in New York City, actually, which always catches me off guard when I hear it, but I know it exists, but they don't allow the students to audition. And
Oh.
I always am like, if you want to audition, you should be able to go audition, because if you book a job, then they
Oh,
need to
I
be able to
heard that.
pivot.
I did hear that. I heard about this. And
Yeah.
I was like, that is kind of bass backwards a little bit.
a, a
You
lot of
know?
it, that was, yeah, a lot of it, as far as I'm concerned. If you have a young dancer who's talented and hungry and they go audition and they book something, the programs are very expensive, which we can talk about in a bit when that comes up. But if they're booking work, then you need to let them go do their work. I mean, the goal of
Right.
being in a program is so that a dancer
100%.
can then viably
100%.
go pursue a successful career. And but all of those things, I think, entail the magical ability to pivot. And I do think it is a magical ability, because I think some folks are so stuck in like, I have to do this, that the willingness and the ability and the, again, back to that word generosity, but like the generosity of spirit with self to go, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is what I thought I wanted, but maybe it's not right for me. And so I do need to make a pivot, and being able to see that of this was, you know, the choice, but it's not the only choice. And, you know, there are programs too, to make sure that I circle back to what you had initially said of, you know, if they decide they want to try pursuing a professional career and then go back to school, there are many, many, many schools that will accept you as a, you know, a year or 2 years or 4 years or 5 years older. There's one particular program. I'm going to try to not name programs because I don't want to be an advertisement for some and not an advertisement for others. But there's one particular program that many of the ballet dancers here in New York City do. And I think for the most part, if not all of it, is done virtually. Like the whole program is available and accessible via living anywhere, and they get their degrees. And some of those dancers don't do that program until they're well into their 30s or 40s even. And so I think, you know, any direction that you go, you're able to change direction.
I agree with you. And I will say the last thing I'll say, because we have to move on to the next segment, we're going to talk about pros and cons of both, right? Or both directions in a second. Melissa's going to lead us into that segment. But I want to say I've been in the industry for 33 years. I started dancing when I was 7. And did I ever think that I was going to be the co founder or CEO of a compression set company that was created for dancers and we were on Shark Tank? No, I did not. That was never in the plan
Right.
at all. But at the same time, I feel like every experience that I have had led me, culminated in Apala. And that is what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing. And I still get to be surrounded by immensely talented people, surrounded by people in the dance industry. So there are ways that you can still be involved. I always thought I was going to be on stage, but I'm still impacting that industry that I love in a different way. And
Right.
there's so many opportunities like that. So
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah, yeah. You
Um,
have to be open to that. Absolutely
yeah,
open to that at
yeah.
all times. For those of you who are just joining us, we are talking to Emily Bufford about what are the pros and cons of pursuing a professional career immediately after high school or going into a college dance program. This is being aired live on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So if you have any friends on any of those platforms, please tell them to come tune in at Apollo Performance or at TP Dance Creations, or you can share and subscribe and know whenever we go live and be able to join us any Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and talk to some of our amazing, amazing guests. If you have comments or questions, I'm sure there are many of you out there, particularly college age dancers who are trying to make this decision right now. Drop them in the chat on any of those platforms. We can see them right here in front of us, and we will get those questions to Emily as much as we can. We had some agreement here from Leslie about all of the different options that are out there, and agreeing with you, Emily. So thank you, Leslie, for that comment. And I want to get into the pros and cons because that's why people are here to figure
Yes.
out what's Emily's opinion on some of these pros and cons. So there's some to both decisions. No decision is perfectly right, and it's definitely not perfectly right for everybody, just like you said. So we're gonna break it down. Give us 1 to 2 pros for going the college program route.
There certainly are pros to going the college route. A big pro of going to college is a built-in peer group. I do think, moving to a large city to pursue dance can be very emotionally challenging because you oftentimes don't have that support that you get at the studio. You grow up with your peers and you have this circle of support surrounding you. And I think a big, big, big pro of being in a college program is that you're surrounded by 40 other young dancers doing exactly the same thing you're doing it with you every day, having the same
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities that you have to show up for class at a certain time, and you're having the same performances, and you're, able to commiserate when you have a hard day. And as much as
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe doesn't seem like a dance pro, I do think it's a big dance pro because I think emotional support in dance is a very important element of what we do. And so that would actually be pro number one. Pro number
Mm.
two of going to a college dance program, I think, is a bit more applicable to young dancers who don't have relationships built with educators already or with choreographers already. But I think, if you come from a studio, I'll use myself for example. I did build these relationships prior to college because my mother fortunately sent me to New York because she's a great dance mom, but a lot of dancers don't have the good fortune of being allowed to come to New York when they're 15, 14, 15, 16, and or don't have respectfully dance moms as wonderful as mine. Um, but in any circumstance, I do think, the element of being able to build a bond with teachers and choreographers who are working actively in the industry, which most of the programs have to some extent, those relationships are invaluable. You cannot recreate that, I don't like the word networking, but I don't think you can recreate that relationship if you don't have somebody where you have the ability to really build it appropriately. And so I do think college dance programs allow young dancers to build those bonds with people who may then in turn, work with them as an assistant or work with them, as they're helping
It's
them to rebuild
failing
their
forward
resume.
in a safe way, right?
Yeah.
We're failing forward, but we're doing it in a monitored, safe environment instead of out in the wild jungle. Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
New York
and
or
there
LA.
and a
Yeah.
very, very much monitored environment where, you have a bad day and you can go, "Dear professor, I am struggling with this," and it's their task to make sure you get a response, and so it's a built-in network of a safety net, really, a fail forward, a safety net, a pool that's a segue from the small pool to the large pool because you are dancing with dancers from all over. Very few of the BFA programs have 40 dancers all from the same studio in the same town. You're being thrust into an environment that is like a very small segue. It's like a pit stop on the highway, almost, so to speak. You started, on the 2-lane road where your hometown studio was, and now you're on the 4-lane highway and you did a pit stop at college where
Yeah,
you
you're
can,
getting used
build a
to the
safety
city
net
life
and
while a new
Mhm.
environment while you're learning this new thing in your life and this new phase, and it's integrating everything in a calmer, easier, smoother way than just
much
learning
calmer
by
and
fire,
much
right?
more, I hesitate to use the word safer because, sometimes students don't have the best experience. I've got a lot of I see a lot of dancers. Some of them have gone to programs and they've had wonderful experiences and they talk about how it was the best time of their life and they, miss being in their BFA program. And then I have other dancers who could not get out of those programs fast enough. It was not the place for them because, for the exact same reasons it felt safe for one, it didn't feel like a safe place for another. And I think, that actually I think is a pro to some extent because it teaches the young dancers what they really want out of themselves and what they really want out of a classroom and what they really want out of a rehearsal process and what they would hope to have from a director. So even that con that I kind of just mentioned, I think in some ways is a pro. Sometimes those not
Mhm.
as good experiences are actually leading you towards your personal greater good of directing you in a different direction. Again, back to a pivot. But I think those are my two biggest pros for college programs at this point, honestly, would be the relationships that a young dancer would be able to build and foster there, and then the emotional support that they get from having a peer group all doing the same thing and having it kind of being a built-in community.
Yes, absolutely. What about the pros for a professional start immediately? What are the pros and cons there?
There are equal distant. Pro number one, I think, would be that you can start working sooner and that you don't hopefully end up in quite as much student debt.
Yes.
Right now, some of these programs, I mean, I want to be cautious because I do think the programs offer wonderful, valuable things. And in the same respect, I think $70,000 a year to get a BFA in dance, if it's not something that, your family can just outwardly afford, if your parents are helping you pay for that and it's no skin off their back to do so, then maybe that is a great place for you. But if you're a young dancer having to take out student loans that you're going to be dancing for a really, really long time to be able to make those payments back, then I think a big pro of, doing your own training and going right to hopefully a professional career is the financial perspective of it, in the sense of you hopefully won't be in student debt ever if possible. You can always do schooling of a different subject at I'll share my own personal. When my mother had said you're not going to New York City and going to be a dance major at a school in New York City, I went to one of the city colleges. I went to Baruch College here on 25th and Lexington. And at this point, if you're a New York resident, I believe the city colleges and the state colleges are actually free tuition. At the
Mhm.
time, I was not an in-state resident when I moved to New York. I was out of state, and even at that point, tuition was very, very affordable. And so it allowed me to put those funds towards my training and towards my housing and towards, any additional things that I was hoping to see shows and get, and to start presenting work. I started presenting choreography at the ripe old age of 19. And
Mhm.
so I think, it also a big pro of maybe not going to school is, although the schools do offer performance opportunities and choreographic opportunities for obviously the BFAs and the BAs. My first performance opportunity for my choreography was at the Steps on Broadway Performance Lab,
Mm.
where they do
Wow.
offer feedback, but it was not, nobody was giving you the full gamut. My experience right now is that a lot of the schools throw everything at the kids, everything they ask for during the performance. They want 18 lighting cues for a 2-minute piece. Then they're like, sure, here's 18 lighting cues for your 2-minute piece. And I don't think that's actually a pro. I think that's a big con, because then they step out and that's an expectation that doesn't exist in
Mm-hmm.
professional realm for the most part. And the other big giant actually pro that I think exists with pursuing professional career right off the bat is kind of inconsistency with the lack of financial problems, but that just working sooner, building those relationships with people who are out in the world, not as your professor, but out in the world working and assisting them and having the ability to do so. There's no conflict there. Had I
Yeah,
been
and
a
that is
dance
different. A lot
teacher,
of people don't realize that, your professors in school, their experience, right, may be different than those who are actually working and on the
In the
front lines
field. Mm-hmm.
right now. Yeah, like they're out in the field, they're booking jobs, they're looking for assistants, they're looking for people to do, demos for them, and there's just all sorts of opportunities as a professional dancer or aspiring professional dancer to get your feet wet and get out there and start making those connections and build up, right? It takes a while, like we said. So at the same time, you have to know what you're getting from your professors versus what you're going to get, and be okay with putting yourself out there. There's a lot of kids now that I know that don't feel comfortable advocating for themselves. They don't feel comfortable being able to get in somebody's face and say, look at me, and this is why you need me, and this is why I'm awesome, and having that confidence to be able to articulate what those things are that make them special, why you want me, and proving that over and over and over. That's not an easy thing to do either. So if that's not you right now, maybe developing those skills at the collegiate level is a better way to go. So definitely,
Mm-hmm.
definitely consider all of those things. It's so important. I know Melissa has a couple more questions before we get to homework, but for all of you out there just joining, I am Bree with Apollo with Melissa McDaniel, my fabulous partner and co-host, and our dear friend Emily Bufford. We're talking today about the pros and cons of pursuing a professional career right out of high school versus going the collegiate route. And we're talking about those two things today, but it's important to note there are other options out there as well, from taking a gap year to cruise ships, right, and taking some time to travel. Like there's so many routes you can go, and we know that. We're talking today about the two most common, the most common conversations that come up, but definitely that is not the be all end all. There's more to it than that. So there's fellowships, apprenticeships, and studio training programs. I know CLI's got a program that they're doing, and there's just so many things. So we will do another show. That's another show for another day, but those are absolutely things to consider as well. And Melissa, take us into our last segment, and then we'll go to homework, because we know you guys
Yes.
always love your homework assignment.
Yes, you're ready for that every week. So this is a big one because this was something that I got interrupted in my journey and my choice by my mom, and I know there are many people out there who do get their choices interrupted because of that. But how much involvement do you think parents should have in the decision making? Do you think that parents or loved ones should intervene when they don't agree with the path that's chosen, or do you think that they should honor the choice of the performance athlete?
it's such a loaded question.
It
I
is.
think there's a lot of spikes on that umbrella and a lot of factors that have to be taken in to it. I think, parent involvement is dependent on how involved have the parents always been. To an extent, is it a mother who has always been involved in her child's, dance training? Is it a father who's always been involved in the child's dance training? Are they hands off parents who don't really know what's going on? They just know that their kid is passionate about dance. And at the end of the day, I do think, fortunately, but also unfortunately, a lot of that comes down to financial discussion. And so I do think, in the regard of, we're talking about how much dance programs can now cost. you know,
Mm.
litmus scholarship money going to a school that's maybe a state school. Let's say, for example, a student is a New York State resident and they audition for SUNY Purchase and they get in. Well, SUNY Purchase is a state school, so that tuition is not really a hindrance. But many of the schools, that's not the circumstance. And so I do think for that purpose, the parent should be involved in the conversation, because if your child is about to go to a program where you can't afford a $280,000
Mhm.
degree, where your kid will, I know, I see, like, had, like, it's wild. I mean, $280,000 to have a BFA in dance with no guarantee of coming out of school and immediately auditioning and booking something that will be a viable financial solution for your child to even pay their rent, let alone start making student loan payments, then in that circumstance, I do think the parents do absolutely need to be involved in that decision, because if your child's dream school is going to turn into a nightmare for them after the fact, then is it really their dream program? And I do
Yeah.
think some rational conversation has to happen there. That kind of subsect of it aside, I think if your child comes to you and says, I want to pursue dance, or I want to move to New York to pursue dance and study something different, or I don't want to study something different at all, I just want to go and try to have a professional career. I think as long as they have a plan of attack that feels
Mhm. A plan.
somewhat reasonable, and again, reasonable has to be subjective, because remember that these young artists are 17 and 18 and 19 as these decisions are typically being made, then I do think you need to kind of take a moment and go, okay, this is my kid's passion. And if it's really what they want to pursue, then we need to allow them to go do that. And then, only voice an opinion if it's going to be something that you see it's to your child's immediate detriment, i.e., back to the financial element of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I also think it's important for you to have that conversation and let them know, like, and this is where I wish high schools and programs would start teaching kids these things sooner, because a lot of times the financial weight of things does not hit our teenagers. They're not
Mhm.
aware really of what that ultimate cost is and how that's going to affect their lives long term. So it's really important to start having those conversations. If your child is expressing interest in pursuing a professional career out of high school, I don't care what it is, okay,
100%.
here's how we can help you. Here's what we can afford to do. We want to support
Mhm.
you, but here's what we can afford to do. This is what you'll be responsible for. And ultimately, when you end up presenting those things that they're responsible for, it's going to hit real quick
Right.
if they have to figure out how to make that money, right? And so sometimes just having those conversations may bring reality into the picture a little quicker. And I think we just need to
Absolutely.
have those conversations. Okay, happy to support you. What does that look like for you? This is what we can do, right? And
Right.
putting it on them and saying, okay, now you go figure out how to make this happen and let us know how we can help. That's ultimately probably one of the greatest gifts you can give them, if not now, then later,
Absolutely.
you know?
And I think also, I have a great relationship with my mother. She is very willing to be open and honest with me with her thoughts on things. I understand not everybody has that, but I do think one of the best things that as a parent you could probably do for your child in this circumstance is to be forthcoming with them. If you're not financially able or willing to be of assistance, because the reality in the arts, and it's an unfortunate part of the dialogue, but I feel like sometimes part of dialogue is unfortunate realities and looking at it and how we can shift it, is that not every young dancer comes from a family that can afford that, and that many of
100%.
the dancers who do
Mhm.
end up in those programs are, of a certain financial subsect where their families can afford it. And for those who can't, for their parents to be realistic with them and honest with them, and sit them down and say, we can't afford, to pay outright for this program. So it's going to involve you taking out a student loan. And this is what taking out a student loan entails. And then let's make, a 5-year plan for you for after you graduate. What happens if you book work right away? How much of that are you then able to pay off and afford your rent and afford to pay for food and afford to
Mhm.
pay for continued training? Because once you graduate with your BFA, you're not done. You're just done with
No.
college. Your
Yeah.
Yeah.
training is still, you're just into a next level of yourself. And I do think, in most circumstances, with finances being the exception to the rule, that if your kid tells you they want to pursue, then you should be a little bit more hands off and say, okay, we support you and let them pursue,
Mm-hmm.
or hands on and let them pursue if that's something you have on your
Yes.
heart to do. But if it's not, then just take that step back and go, okay, I'm going to allow you to do it, even though I don't know how to help you there. But I do think for all, especially if it's a financial circumstance that could leave their child kind of in a little bit of a lurch later on in life, that they do need to sit down with them and have a very realistic conversation of, this is what, going to this program perhaps will mean for you, not
Wow.
just for the next 4 years, but for perhaps for the next 20
Right.
years,
Right.
And it's a
perhaps for the
fine
next
line of
30
like
years.
you're not saying I don't believe in you. It's just bringing the reality of I believe that you can do this and this is amazing and we want to support you. Here is the reality of what this looks like so you are aware, right?
Right.
And just making sure that
Exactly.
they know it's not that you don't support them, it's that they need to know these very hard real numbers. We
Mm-hmm.
are
Real
running out of
numbers.
time and I want to make sure we have time to get to homework. So Emily, as you know, we like to give our viewers homework and things they can work on right now to see some improvement and help them in this area. So, what is one action you challenge our listeners to work on between now and next week to make progress here?
To make progress with this topic, I would
Yeah. Yeah,
challenge.
just conversations they may be having in their own life and decisions that may be weighing them down. What's one challenge you want to issue to everybody?
I am an advocate of a pro con sheet. So, my homework to y'all out there watching this, I hope it's been helpful, would be, if you're looking at schools, or if your child or your students are looking at schools, find the time to sit down with them as an individual. So, if it's many students, find the time to sit down with each of them, not all together, but to make that 10 or 15 minutes available to them, and make a pros cons list with them about, first and foremost, school versus no school. What are their hopes? What are their dreams? What are the
Mm-hmm.
things that they want to pursue as part of their long-term goals? And again, do remind them, as Bree mentioned before, remind them that they're able to pivot. Their long-term goals are not finite and set in stone. They're just their long-term goals today or whenever you do this. And then, make a subsect of that pros cons sheet. If at the top of the pros cons sheets they come up with, I do want to go to school, or they come up with, I don't want to go to school, I want to immediately move to pursue, then do a subsect of the pros cons list and do it for whatever their chosen kind of choice was. If they're going to school, then go pros cons from perhaps the school that they're thinking about going to, or the specific program. Some of the schools have many programs. Do they want to be a BFA? Do they want to be a BA? Do they actually want to do musical theater, and they're going to be a musical theater
And
BA
they may
instead
not
of a
even
dance
know the
BFA?
answers to those questions yet. So getting the wheels turning on these things is also important, you know?
It is one
It,
of the most helpful things. I still make them for myself quite frequently, because oftentimes with a young dancer, they think they know what they want, but seeing it very cut and dry of, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
made this list of things and there are 10 items on this side of this list, and there are 4 items on this side of this list. Okay, well, that's very, I can see it, it's tangible, and I can move forward from there knowing
yes.
that I have really put my spirit pen to paper. And I would offer, do it pen to paper as part of the homework. Don't do it on your phone. Don't do it on a Word document on your computer.
I
Put
need
a
pen and
pen
paper.
in
I'm
your
Pro,
old.
yeah,
hand
I
and
know.
write
I'm a
it
pen and
down.
paper girl too, but pros and cons list. I mean, it's a classic. But that is your homework for this week: is make your pros and cons list. If you're having this debate at home or in with your studio director or your peers, make your pros and cons list and start writing out what are those goals that you have. We always have homework we like to throw on the pile as well, so we want to challenge you to take our Steps initiative. It's completely free. It's online. Go at your own pace, but there's 5 modules for you to take. Again, at your own pace. Everything has been curated by experts in each field. Again, from racism, gender inequity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and dance medicine and science. It's all there for you to kind of establish a foundation and give you a platform to investigate and leap further on your own. It's just a great education tool if you're working with children, if you're a parent of a child, or an educator in any way. So take a look at that. Melissa's going to pop that in the chat, as well as check out our friends at niyamacares.org and ypadnow.com. They're doing great work together to keep kids happy, healthy, safe, and dance. And we need more of that in this industry for sure. Emily, thank you so much for being here. Tell us how people can reach you.
Thank you for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be with both of you. You can reach me or find me here in New York City at Broadway Dance Center and Steps on Broadway and producing the Young Choreographers Festival.
Yes.
And you can find me on Instagram, and my handle is just Bufford, Bufferd. And I would love to connect with you. If you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out. I'm glad to always discuss dance.
I love it. Thank you so much. It has been another fantastic conversation. We're so thrilled to have you back with us. I hope you all out here enjoyed it as well. If you took something from it, please drop a line and let us know how this helped you in any way. What do you want to hear about going forward on Beyond the Steps? We are scheduling for 2023. We have a lot of great things in store, including a podcast and turning this into a podcast and a blog. So
Right.
check that out coming to you in 2023 because we don't have enough on our plate. We're going to add more. But it is just so fun to chat with you, Emily. Thank you again. Thank you all for watching. You have lots of homework to keep up with, but until then, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps and everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.